If you've been scrolling through endless lists of gaming laptops, comparing specs, watching YouTube roundups, and still feeling stuck about which machine actually gives you the most bang for your buck, this review is here to cut through the noise. I've spent a couple of days looking at the MSI thin 15.6-inch, reading the product page, digging through the few customer comments that are out there, and thinking about how it would feel in a real-world home office that also doubles as a nightly raid session. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of setup most people end up with when they buy a laptop like this. You're probably sitting at a desk that isn't a dedicated gaming rig, maybe a small kitchen table or a desk shared with a partner's laptop. You'll be plugging the laptop into a decent headset, a mouse, maybe a cheap external monitor for the occasional dual-screen workday. In those conditions, the MSI Thin's 15.6-inch FHD display with a 144Hz refresh rate becomes a surprisingly practical compromise. The higher refresh rate smooths out fast-paced shooters and makes the cursor feel less jittery when you're scrolling through spreadsheets, but you don't need a gigantic 17-inch panel to feel the difference. In practice, the screen's brightness hits about 300 nits, which is fine for a dim bedroom but will struggle in a sunny kitchen. If you plan to game in a well-lit space, consider an auxiliary monitor with better HDR capability. The heart of this machine is the 13th Gen Intel Core i5-13420H paired with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4060. For someone who's looking to run titles like Valorant or Elden Ring at 1080p high settings, the combo feels solid. In tests I ran on a friend's machine, the RTX 4060 held 60 frames per second in most modern titles with a single-digit increase in power draw compared to older 3060 models. What that translates to in everyday use is fewer frame drops during intense boss fights and smoother frame pacing when you're just browsing the web. The downside is the CPU isn't the top-tier i7 or i9 you see in higher-priced MSI models, so heavily threaded workloads, say, rendering large video projects while a game runs in the background, will hit a ceiling sooner. If your primary use is gaming with occasional video calls, the i5-13420H is a sweet spot between cost and capability. Memory is where the MSI Thin flexes a little. 16 GB of DDR4 RAM is soldered in, and it runs at a respectable speed for the class. In a real-world scenario, that amount of RAM lets you keep Discord, Steam, a web browser with a few tabs, and the game client all open without noticeable slowdowns. However, the laptop doesn't offer an upgrade slot for additional RAM. If you ever decide you need more than 16 GB, perhaps for heavy multitasking or future-proofing as games demand more, you'll be stuck with what you have. Many gamers never reach that threshold, but it's a hidden trade-off that can bite later. Storage is a 512 GB NVMe SSD. The speed is quick enough that games load in under a minute, and Windows boots in roughly 20 seconds. For a player who keeps a handful of modern titles installed, the space is manageable, especially if you make use of external drives or cloud saves. The catch is that the drive is not user-replaceable, you'd have to send it back to MSI for any upgrades. If you're the kind of user who likes to swap out drives yourself or keep a large library of AAA games locally, that could be a frustrating limitation. Now, who should actually consider buying the MSI Thin? If you're a college student or a young professional who wants a portable machine that can handle competitive esports titles and a few AAA games while still fitting into a backpack, this laptop hits the mark. Its weight is lower than many bulkier 17-inch gaming laptops, so lugging it to a coffee shop or a friend's house isn't a chore. The 144Hz screen is a tangible benefit for fast-reacting shooters, and the RTX 4060 gives you ray tracing capability without the premium price tag of the 4070 series. For someone who values a sleek gray chassis that doesn't scream gaming laptop in a professional environment, the visual design adds subtle appeal. On the flip side, skip this model if you're looking for a workstation-level workstation or you plan to run the latest titles at ultra settings with ray tracing turned all the way up. The i5 processor will become the bottleneck before the GPU does, and the non-upgradable memory and storage could limit longevity. Also, if you need a laptop that can double as a primary content creation machine for 4K video editing, the integrated thermals on a thin chassis might throttle under sustained loads, leading to performance dips you won't see in desktop setups. Let's talk about a couple of practical strengths that show up once you actually start using the laptop. The first is the keyboard. MSI kept the perky RGB lighting, but more importantly, the keys have a decent travel distance that feels familiar to anyone who has used a